Hi, I'm Laura,
Hi, I'm Deanne.
And I'm Philippe.
and welcome to our Lyman book club. We are reading and Frankincense by Dorothy Dunnett, and we are going to cover chapters 10, 11, and 12. Philippe will lead our discussion. Any thoughts you two want to share before we dive in on the overall chapters?
These were exciting chapters.
Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting things that happen. I'm very interested in what our discussion will be when we break down the sort of lovers' quarrel between Marta, Lymond, and Jarrett in the second chapter. That'll be fun. But
yeah, boy, did the subtext become text.
Whoa, did it ever?
I was like, I was not expecting it to be that blunt.
Yeah, I have the same feeling of these three chapters. The middle one, chapter 11, is my favorite because it has that amazing scene with the crushed orange blossoms and Marta and Jared and Lyman, and it's like super claustrophobic and like rich with all these different scents. And yeah, like you said, a lot of subtext suddenly becomes text, and like I really enjoy this the relationships between the three of them and the idea of them being trapped on this nightmare road trip together with all of these like really intense sexual and emotional things going on between them all.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah. But other than that, it's a very action-packed, quickly paced book. There's a lot of things happening in short amounts of time. So
yeah. I was saying before we started filming that I didn't make a lot of notes as I was reading these chapters, but it wasn't because there weren't interesting things happening. It was just I just kept going through the story, and I'd get like 2 or 3 pages in and go like, oh, I haven't written anything. It's just because I just kept following the story. So yeah, so we'll see.
Definitely, it's like compulsive reading, this book.
Yeah, so it's very hard, especially in this book, to do it the way we are doing it, with like short little bursts of 3 chapters at a time in a week. Because like when I finish, I'm like, I want more.
Me too. That's definitely why I always read these like right before we film, because then I have to stop to do our discussion, because otherwise I would totally plow ahead. So yeah,
I don't know.
Once I've stopped, I can wait till the next week. But
yeah, I would not have been able to resist. I think I read like the whole series in a week because
oh my gosh. And here it's what, 7 months, 8 months since we started? I can't remember, and we're not even halfway through the 4th book yet.
Yeah, we started like last July.
Yeah. Somewhere around then. I thought it was June, but
anyway,
we can go back and look later.
Yeah. All right, so chapter 10 is the Kinthos.
Yes. So, just a quick sort of recap of what happens. Philippa is able to persuade Archie, who is very easily persuaded to go to Zakynthos instead of going back to England. They part ways with Fogg, or Foggy, as I like to say, and they're her servants. So it's just Archie and Philippa now. They make it to Zakynthos, but they have to stay a couple days in a quarantine, because that is how the Venetians who sort of run Zakynthos rule things. And in this quarantine spot, they meet a fellow Scotsman, how coincidental, from Paisley, which I did a little squeal of joy at, because Paisley means special things to us in another way, named Sheemy Wormit, who was sort of a pirate, sort of a trader, sort of a translator, jack of all trades. They realize that they have chicken pox, or that some of them have chicken pox. So their 10-day quarantine turns into 40. And boy, am I jealous of them that they only had to quarantine for 40 days. She does not know how good she had it.
I know. I was thinking,
quarantine.
That's like April 15th or something that we would have been done.
It was only 40 days. While they were in quarantine, Philippa learns that the House of the Palm Tree, which is the place she is looking for, is also the house of Marino Donati, who is the brother of Evangelista Donati, who worked for Gabriel as Jolita's sort of midwife / servant So she thinks, oh, well, then I am on the right track. That must be where Caredon is. And that is the first half of this chapter. So we can go back and discuss in more detail now.
Yeah, I remember the first time I read this, reading about the quarantine and being like, wow, that's so awful. 5 weeks in quarantine. Stand it back then. Yeah, now it's like, they're so lucky.
No, my girl.
Yeah, our concept of bearable amounts of isolation has been greatly expanded.
Yeah.
Oh.
We learned some fun things about, or interesting things about Archie in this. We learned that he was menagerie keeper to Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent.
Mm-hmm.
And we learned that he's familiar with the Dame de Dutons and from past experience is aware that her statements tend to be a ween irregular in the spirit of that which they seemed to convey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Archie has a lot of practical knowledge about a lot of things, which I think we saw before. Like, he did seem to be very capable, but it's interesting to see like the breadth of his knowledge. And one thing I loved is Philippa's little commentary on this first page about how they can basically start a circus, sort of. Like, and also, is she cheating at cards with Archie? Because she talks about how she can do card tricks. And so I'm like, is she cheating at cards with Archie? Which I would find absolutely delightful.
It says it was a cutthroat game. I have a hard time imagining Philippa would cheat, but who knows?
But she said, it's the later where she says, I can do card tricks. You can train animals. You can do this. And so I was just imagining her as like a savvy poker player, like flipping the cards around and stuff.
Also, this quarantine sounds awesome because she gets to hang out with other people and bond with them and play games with them. And also she's like on this island where they can go outside and sit under a tree. Like, I'm really jealous of this quarantine.
This quarantine sounds like a vacation.
In this tropical setting, it's beautiful outside, you know, lucky. I wish that's where my quarantine was too.
I agree. Also, I love that they're being quarantined for chickenpox. although one guy has the mumps. I mean, to be fair, chickenpox as an adult is shingles, which is incredibly painful. So I guess it makes sense, but yeah.
Well, I'm not sure if they knew it was chickenpox to begin with. It might have been the regular pox. So
yeah, they thought it was something else. Yeah, and one guy had the mumps, which is nothing to.
Was that the dervish, the guy who lies on nails? And it's funny. He's like, he can lie on nails and like touch these hot iron bars and do all of these painful things with like nothing. But then like as soon as he gets the chicken pox, it like describes that he's in agony over itching. And I was like, oh, well, I guess he's not.
He has the shingles.
True.
That's bad. So. If he had the shingles.
I just found it ironic that we've got this sort of throwaway character who does like all of these death-defying feats or like, you know, painful feats, and then like shingles comes along and like throws him on his back.
Yeah, I think this is also a nice like break from how dark some of the book is, because there's a lot of humor in this section and a lot of colorful characters.
Yeah, and they're just funny. Like, they seem to be interacting with each other in a funny way, you know. And Philippa, I can just see Philippa as this like teenage girl dropped in the middle of these rather weird men, you know, with these skills that she just has no concept of before, and then like asking a ton of questions and like learning all kinds of things and getting stories from them. And
and she's learning languages, so she's a very productive quarantine here.
Yeah. Can get a lot done in 40 days of doing nothing. So
also, this was kind of a throwaway comment, but it mentions that Archie's brother was Lyman's right-hand man. Was Turkie Matt Archie's brother?
Yeah.
We knew that already?
Yeah, we talked about that when we were doing the second book. When Archie first introduces himself, he's in that sort of cellar where Lyman does the thing with the printing press, and Robin Stewart is there too. And
Okay. I just forgot.
Yeah, when he goes to visit Archie later, he's like, yeah, my brother was Turkie Matt. So.
No.
Oh, Turkie Matt, I'd forgotten about him.
Me too.
Until this moment.
He was like Archie version 1.
Yeah.
So you had to bring in his brother to fill the same narrative role.
That's true.
We also have in this chapter more references to the Odyssey, which I think I mentioned last time we talked, like occurs throughout, because this book follows the pathway of the Odyssey and the whole structure of, going from place to place, searching for something. And
I was just going to mention that. It's very interesting. And I picked up on that, not only because they were talking about the Odyssey, but he also mentions the island of the Lotus Eaters, which is one of the main stories of the Odyssey. And that comes around in the next chapter as well. They mention about Gautier being the first one to eat the lotus at the Gazelle's prison. And I was like, oh, I see what they're doing here.
Yeah, and when Gazelle and Marta talk, they use Odysseus as a code word for Lyman. But yeah, in this one, it's the English ship Mary, bound for Odysseus's kingdom. Unhappily, since Odysseus's time, the Flower of the Orient had drawn up a few rules. So just more and more of these little references. I want to follow like the pathway of this book for like the most epic Mediterranean vacation one day.
That would be amazing.
Amazing. I think we also have arguably some bits of the era the book was written in seeping through into the book, even though it's set obviously a lot earlier, which is, it was written in the 60s. There's a reference to transcendental meditation. And there's also the Pilgrims of Love, who sound just like hippies, although they're a real historical thing. But I felt like between the transcendental meditation and the hippies, like a little bit of the fact that she was writing this in the 60s was coming through.
Yeah. I sort of when she said transcendental meditation, for some reason in my head I went to like metaphysical poets, which isn't the same thing, but the Pilgrims of Love thing, what the hell is that?
So it's a real thing.
Okay.
So I'll jump ahead and show what I was going to show you guys. So basically, Nicholas Nicholay really did do voyages through the Mediterranean and the Ottoman Empire in this era, and a whole bunch of what Dunnett puts in the book comes like straight out of his writings. So these are a bunch of pictures of all the different sort of types of people he saw on his journey. Unfortunately, I know there's one of a Pilgrim of Love, but I couldn't find it. So I'll have to keep looking at that. But there is this whole description of them, which actually is almost word for word the way that she describes them when she introduces Nicole. So it's basically they're fair young men and of rich houses, which give themselves a run around the country and to travel through many diverse regions and provinces, to see and understand the world with great pleasure, under color of their pilgrimage and religion. For the most part, they are good artificers, and given to reading and describing all their voyages, the lands and countries which they've run through and traveled. They carry none other apparel than a little cassock with sleeves being of purple color, made and fashioned like unto a deacon's coat, so short that it comes about their knees. Girdle of silk and gold, blah, blah, blah. Symbols of silver mixed with some other clear sounding metal. Those are the bells that I think she describes Nicole having. And then more about all their clothes. And then there's also stuff about them making fair and sweet music with their voices and the sounds of their cymbals. And they sing. And they secretly and under pretext of religion do of a fervent love draw unto them the hearts of many fair women, and likewise of the fairest younglings, of which they are no less amorous than they are of the womankind. So they are given to unto the abominable sin of luxury against nature. On and on about voluptuousness and pleasure, etc. So kind of seems like there are a bunch of like children of the rich who go around traveling and having lots of sex.
bisexual and traveling around having a lot of sex.
They also sound a lot like hippies.
Yeah.
Ew, absolutely.
But I feel like she
like hippies.
obviously read this whole book that I was reading from. It's a huge description of like all the different archetypes. She also, like, a lot of the descriptions of the dervishes, I think, come from there. She obviously read that and was like pulling stuff out of it to put in this book. And of course, she put Nicholas Nicholay in the last book.
Right.
I hope he comes back and agitates more toes.
Agitates the toes.
Something else that gets brought up in this chapter, and I'm only mentioning this because it comes around in one of the next chapters as well, but Archie starts talking about a man that he sort of idolizes called Pierre Gilles of Albi, who's a scholar and a zoologist. And this would have been a complete throwaway if Jarrett doesn't mention him again in the next chapter. So I almost feel like we'll be seeing this Pierre Gilles at some point in this book.
Yeah.
We also, the fact that Shimi Wermit saw him dissecting a giraffe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he seems kind of like a scientist sort of guy, like interested in anatomy and
yeah.
So yeah.
It would be right up Archie's sort of purview as, you know, the keeper of menageries throughout the time. Just the fact that he used to own or run a menagerie for the Emperor Solomon, he's going to be super helpful later in this book, I have a feeling.
Hopefully, if he doesn't die.
Oh, shush. Don't wish that upon our people. Nobody dies in this book. No, not a single other person.
Yeah.
I know that's not true, unfortunately.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I do love this little bit where they're talking. This is on 178, where Philippa is just talking about this quarantine and stuff, and it says she longed to march outside and grapple with the strangeness of it all, exercising whatever sophistication she'd acquired in these months of untoward traveling, and the despised talent, which was the only one she'd ever been credited with, a gift for plain common sense. And I really liked that little glimpse into her where you see that she doesn't like the fact that the thing that everybody says about her is that she's got common sense, you know, and it's like that's like, oh, Philippa, she's got common sense, you know, and that the people don't say anything else about her. And yeah, that just made me go, oh,
there's more to her than that.
Yeah.
Also, I think interesting is when they talk to Shimi, right, when they figure out that he's Scottish and says Archie, and they talk about Lyman, he's like, oh, I know who they are. I knew the grandfather, the first of the barons. Again, another reference to this first baron, Lyman's grandfather. We always get reminders about him in every book. I'm just saying.
Yeah, it's interesting that, like, I find it super interesting that he does keep coming up like randomly, when, as far as we know in terms of the narrative, he shouldn't be coming up randomly. So it just tells us that there's something going on with the grandfather.
He made a big impression. Even though he's dead, he's the one that everybody remembers when they think of the prophets.
Which reminds me of Lyman. So, you know.
Yeah, this guy actually had heard of Lyman. Oh, I heard he was an outlaw.
Yeah. It's like his grandfather and him seem to be the people in the family who have made this dramatic impression on everyone. So it seems to have skipped Richard and his father, who the only thing people seem to say about his father is that he's a jerk. Like, that seems to be the general consensus. So
I enjoy Philippa and Shimi's conversation about Lymond, where he's talking about the baby being born, and Shimi's like, oh, well, you better keep Kevin away from Lyman because he's going to try and kill him, because that's what these nobles do to try and gain and consolidate power. And Philippa's like, I don't know what you've been reading, but you'll never go through life with your head stuffed full of nonsense like that.
But of course, he's actually correct for many people. Like he's got a view of society that's real. But I love Philippa's at the end of that where she says, no one seems to be able to credit that a father should care what becomes of his son.
She's got such a good, pure heart, but actually, I feel what Lyman does deep down too. So,
yeah.
Shall we go to the next part of the chapter? Yeah. Sure. So they do eventually get over the quarantine, 40 days in, and the three of them head up to the house of the palm tree under the pretense of Shimi's got these pearls that he's going to sell. So while he's selling these pearls to Marino Donati, an earthquake happens. Hi, Deus Ex Machina. And it gives Philippa a chance to sort of explore the house. She discovers a child who is wearing a matching ring from the one that the Dame de Toutance gave her. And the child is being looked after by Mikal, who was this pilgrim of love that we spoke about a little bit earlier. Through their talkings, she discovers in these sort of ship manifests, Philippa discovers a secret message that Marino was getting from Gabriel. And in the secret message, it says that the subject is in Jerba and the object is being sent to Stambul, which is Istanbul, I think, which is Constantinople, all of those things. And that there's going to be an attack from the knights on Zwara. So there's sort of a plan in hatch, a plan coming about this attack on Zwara. And then she's also sort of convinced that she has found Karedin. But I think at this point, it's safe to assume, which we learn later for true, that there's actually two different children that we're tracking throughout this book.
I knew there were two babies!
One of them is definitely Karedin, and one of them is somebody else who is probably actually Jolita and Gabriel's child. But we don't have any real clue as to which one is which yet. It could be either way, I think.
Yeah. It could be either one. But it's definitely Jolita and Gabriel's kid and Lyman and Una's kid. Like those are the two kids. Yeah. There are definitely two blonde babies floating around the Mediterranean and North Africa. And
But which is which? Which is which?
There are more references to the idea of sentimentality in this chapter, which just keeps coming up. And so we have Philippa thinking about the children and the three possibilities, because Jared has told her that the kid is dead. And she realizes that Jared could have lied to her with an unsentimental logic, which would have shattered the Chevalier Blythe.
Yep.
So again, like this idea of sentiment is kind of bad. And Philippa, who's so practical and no nonsense, is also unsentimental.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the fact that like Philippa is emotional, but not like she's still thinking logically about things. And even though she is allowing her emotions to drive some of her decisions, she's not allowing her emotions to like cloud her decisions. Like I think she's not denying her emotions. Like I feel like Lyman is going through this and trying to kill his emotional connection to things because he's afraid it will it'll mess up his plans and all that. Philippa's not doing that. Like she has this emotional desire to save this baby, and she's not trying to kill that drive. Yet at the same time, she is trying to think through things logically, and she's still a teenager, so maybe her logic isn't the greatest, but she is trying to have a thoughtful approach to this, which I like.
Yeah, some of what she's doing is logical, but I would not call sending Archie and Shimi away and deciding to travel with a complete stranger that she's just met in order to find this child logical at all.
Yeah, that was bonkers.
Yes, and
I love that she's like, sure, this is a good idea. This is not a good idea.
No, it's not a good idea. I'm very worried about her and what's going to happen. Because when I read this chapter, I just got this impression that this Mikal person that we've seen before. And like, I immediately started thinking that he might be the person that was wearing shell pink all the way back in the beginning of the book.
Oh.
So I went back and I read that part to see if there were any likenesses, and they really don't talk about him at all in the beginning, other than the fact that he had like gray eyes, or maybe Mikal has gray eyes. So I was looking for that, and there's just not enough of a description of the person. So it's a theory. I don't know if it's right or not, but like, this could just as easily be another trap that Gabriel set. It's one of two things. This is another Gabriel trap because he didn't know exactly where Lyman would go, or Philippe is onto something and she is actually outsmarting Gabriel in this point and like moving ahead, trying to track whichever one of these children it is.
Yeah, I did not even think that Mikal was someone we met before. That did not cross my mind. But I do agree that he seems super sketchy. Mm-hmm. And to have like, I'm just not real thrilled with Philippa, this 15-year-old, like smart but rather naive, and she's not educated in the ways of the world, and particularly this part of the world. Your old girl going off with this like free love hippie guy who's just like, I do not trust him either with her or to protect her from anything. And yeah,
it's just ill-advised.
Yes. Yes,
he could be sent by Gabriel. It could just be a coincidence. Also think about who sent Philippa here. Why is she here?
Mm-hmm.
True, the Dom sent her here. So
right, because she never encountered Gazelle. Kiara. Yeah, she was supposed to meet her and she wasn't there. So, and we know where she is. So it's, yeah. And I do love Philippa's little reference to the fact that the Dame de Dutantes, she says about the prediction, she said there had been authority in that prediction. There was also, for Philippa's money, a strong suggestion of mischief. And so she's not unaware of the fact that the Dame de Dutantes is perhaps not the most altruistic person, and that there could be something fishy going on here. So,
and I mean, would the Dom be sending her to find, she just asked to find the child. Is she sending her to find Lyman's child or Gabriel's child? Or does the Dom even know which child this is? I would assume yes, of course, but she's being tricksy, as these oracles of fate often are.
I mean, is it more likely that Gennady has Gabriel and Jolita's child, or that Gennady has Lyman and Una's child? Like, I feel like on the surface, it makes more sense for Gennady to have Jolita and Gabriel's child.
Yeah, that's what I would do too.
But there was actually an explicit naming of how old the child is in this place, and it matches Corredin's age, not Jolita and Gabriel's age. So I made a note when it happens, so whenever we get there, but whoever said it, if they're reliable about aging a toddler to the correct amount, then this is Corredin and not nameless blonde baby. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. Like, this could be Gabriel Jr. We don't have a name for this baby, right?
Jobriel.
Jobriel.
Jolita Gabriel. Jobriel. I just made that up.
No. And Corredin is on this ship. So I don't know.
There's a lot hinging on who, including the author, can accurately assess the size and behavior of a 18-month-old versus like a 28-month-old or whatever.
Right. But it is super different. Like, that's the thing I keep going back to. Like, a kid who's like 15 months old versus a kid who's a year and a half old versus a kid who's 2.5 or 3 years old. That's a big difference when you're talking kids. Like, they grow a lot in that stage. So you put those two kids side by side, they're really different looking.
But also when you mix in things like different genetics, trauma, malnutrition.
Yeah.
How certain can you be?
It's true. You can't be. But
going back to what you said about Philippa was going to meet Kia Hatun there, I don't think that's what the prophecy said. I'm just looking at it. The Dame de Duton says you will go to Algiers. Then, if you still wish to trace the child by yourself, you and the man Abernathy will go to the Isle of Zakynthos, to the house of the palm tree, and you will present there a ring which my cousin will give you. After that, all will depend on her goodwill. That doesn't mean she's gonna. It just means that what happens next depends on her goodwill.
Okay.
And then that's where she says, "Not on my goodwill, on my whim."
Okay. So so she wasn't necessarily going to be there.
It also is ambiguous about saying you will find the child there. It just says if you still wish to trace the child by yourself, you will go there.
Which they are, and they do, and they did. So
Philippa was laying all bets on finding the actual child there. She thought that she was going to go there and the child was going to be there. So I don't think she expected it to just be a step along her journey.
Right.
Yeah.
But of course it's a step.
So we also have on 188 at the bottom the description of Michal, which pretty much matches almost word for word a lot of the Nicholas Nicholay description, the symbols, the bells, probably Greek, probably rich, certainly well-born, and that they travel Asia from patron to patron, giving of poetry, music, and love in exchange for a livelihood. So very, very clearly taken from that Nicholas Nicholay description.
I love that at the top of 188 it says Philippa, who spoke dreadful Italian and was not impressed by beautiful young men, said over her shoulder. And you're just like, go Philippa. I did find it interesting that, and I like that she explains this later, during the earthquake when she's exploring. She says of all the rooms Philippa discovered, the Signor's study was perhaps the most interesting. She stayed there briefly until blah blah. So it doesn't tell us at all what she found in the study that was interesting. So I just underlined it. I'm like, why is the study interesting? And then you find out later it's because she saw the bills of lading that had code in them, because then a little bit later after this, she like checks for coded writing on the bill of lading, and I was kind of like, why in the world does she think that this would be there? Like, that makes no sense. And then later it says that's what she found in the studies. Okay, it all comes together.
We also can extrapolate some information about Michal. One is he laughs at one of her witty jokes and she realizes he's smart. And then later there's a comment about Donati doing those things in code and thinking that people wouldn't be able to figure out what he was doing, but obviously Michal could. So he's an observant and intelligent person that seems to fly under the radar because people don't think highly of the Pilgrims of Love.
Which, I mean, if they're sort of hippie-esque, you can see, like, sure, they're probably seen as, like, flighty.
Yeah, we're described.
Obsessed.
We're told that Shimi's indulgent contempt was a commonplace reaction to the Pilgrims of Love, which is totally, like, the same kind of attitude you'd get from the adults about the hippies.
Yeah, and and it's sort of interesting too, because if you think about that, like that kind of person, who's sort of obsessed with pleasure, travels around a lot, probably like people notice but don't notice at the same time, like they would catch attention but would also perhaps be easily dismissed. Like, this is a super good spy profession. Like, if somebody just wants to travel around and spy a lot, this would be a good thing to be. So
we also we didn't really talk that much, but 193 is where we get the description of what's going to happen to the child that Philip is on the trail of, which is the Dev Shirme, which is the every 4 years collecting of children as tribute to the Ottoman Empire. And this is all totally true historical fact that you can go read about. It's horrifying, actually. Basically, all these children are taken away from their parents and put into slavery, and they actually have tons, depending on how well they do, they have tons of opportunities to actually have a very good life. and rise up very high in terms of power, but they're not allowed to like start their own dynasty in order to keep anyone from competing with the power of the Sultan, basically.
Yeah. So they personally can have a lot of wealth and power, but they cannot have any children or have any legacy. And it's really sad. I liked another little just glimpse into Philippe. I love Philippa. So I love these little glimpses into her. On 189, it says, she's talking to Mikhail, and she says, she said it in her head twice, then said it aloud. And then she goes on to talk to him about something. And I just love that idea that she's thinking about what she's going to say to him, and she runs it through her head a couple of times before she speaks. And how often do we have characters who are just like Jarrett, which is just like, here's my thoughts come out my mouth with no conscious ideas about what I'm saying at all. And yet Philippa is here. It just shows her being very, very deliberate. And maybe she's still giving away more than she should, but at least she's trying to think through the consequences of what she's saying.
Yeah, she and Jared are quite opposite also in terms of that sentimentality thing, right? She's much more logical. He's so driven by emotion.
And she hates steamy emotions, which just cracked me up. Steamy emotions!
Meanwhile, Jared is entirely constructed out of steamy emotions.
Oh, yes. Yep. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and so then I'm curious what you guys thought about the Nicholas sort of talk about, well, why rescue this child? He's going to have a great life as a, child of tribute.
Mm-hmm.
And she talks about why, and it's interesting. I mean, it's historically accurate attitude, she wants to save him from dying without kinsmen, from distorting in Islam a temperament shaped for Western philosophies, from wielding a power that may bring him face to face on a battle plane with his own flesh and blood.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's also the element of she says those things, but she also just wants to go rescue this kidnapped baby.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like she's kind of giving these logical reasons about why this is a bad idea for this baby to grow up in, wealth and power and whatever, if that would be his fate. But I think she also just wants to go save the baby.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Would he have a better life as a bastard child in the West or as a child who could rise very high in the East? But I think the argument about blood, like he will have people who love him at home and so he with them. Like that's probably.
I think definitely there's a guarantee that if she gets Karenin and brings him home, she knows what kind of treatment he'll get and how he'll be loved and treated. Whereas there's no guarantee, even though there's a chance that these great things may happen to him in the Ottoman Empire, it's not set in stone.
Yeah. Well, also, I think in general, like bastard child in the West is not a good fate, but this particular bastard child in the West has people who deeply care about him, and like his fate, if he goes home, is much brighter or his possible fate is much brighter.
Yeah. I mean, the Kates and Sibyllahs of the world aren't gonna care that he's bastard, and Lyman, despite his best attempts to pretend otherwise, really wants him.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very much so.
Yeah.
And then we got this. No.
You go ahead.
I was just to say, we get this whole bit about the subject and the object on page 195, which it's, the subject is at Jerba, and the object goes to Stembul. And I thought it was kind of interesting from a vocabulary standpoint, because like the subject is like what is the active part of a sentence, what is doing the thing in the sentence, whereas the object is what is done upon, so what is having things done upon it. And so it was interesting that like the subject seems to be, I don't know, is one character and the object is another character.
Mm.
So.
Well, it makes sense in terms of the book, right? Lyman is the subject and Karenin is the object.
Yeah.
Of course,
So-
it doesn't really help answer our question of which child is which, because I think both children are headed to Istanbul. So
yeah, we don't know.
It would be too easy.
I know.
Yeah, I wrote that there were several points in this chapter where I just wrote, this seems really easy. Like too easy. Like breaking the code. She literally said it was easy. Like in the book. Dunnett tells us it's easy. And I'm kind of like, oh, that doesn't seem good.
No, but I mean, here's something to think about as well. If this is a trap laid by Gabriel, it wasn't meant to be sprung by Philippa. Just like the trap in the silkworm fire wasn't meant to be struck by Jarrett. I think Philippa is a complete wild card, and that Gabriel had no idea that she'd be along for this trip. So
yeah,
if this is a trap, this was meant to be another trap for Lymond.
Right. That's a really good point. So
I don't know. It tends to make me think that Philippa may actually be ahead of the game here, and this isn't a trap. But I just don't trust this McCall person at all.
Yeah.
At least not yet. I don't know enough about him.
But interestingly, if this is a Gabriel shenanigans situation, and Mikkel is a Gabriel plant, then if he was intended for Lyman and not Philippa, like that's a whole different seduction scenario going on there. So interesting.
It could work.
Yeah.
I think also though the wild card here is who is Kiaya Hatun working for, and how reliable is the Dame de Dutons? Because if it is a Gabriel plan and he arranged for Kiaya Hatun to send Philippa on this path, then it could easily be that she's doing exactly what she's supposed to be doing in Gabriel's plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
True.
Also, Archie's like very, very quick sum up of Mikkel's character was like, how much do we trust Archie to be able to discern this quickly? Like it says, from the bottom of what was indeed a profound experience of men and animals, drew of his knowledge of both. And then Archie goes on to say that he thinks Mikkel is a good guy, and he makes this decision rather quickly. And then he says, but have you the wits to safeguard and cherish a lassie? And Mikkel vows, I vow to you by my soul that I shall protect her. And he and Archie have this sort of back and forth. And he says, like, if the girl is harmed, or the son, or the gold, God will dance for him, meaning Lyman. So Archie's kind of like, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, you are going to be in deep shit. But I love that phrase, God will dance for him.
I mean, it's definitely like, I think you're trustworthy and I'm going to send her off with you, but also if you screw up and hurt her, you're going to suffer. So there's a little bit of a threat in there.
Yeah. Or if you steal the gold, or if you, it's like a man at present in Jerba, the gold is his gold. The boy is his son. If the girl is harmed, or the son, or the gold. It's like, if you steal the money or hurt the kid or hurt this girl. Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely insane to let Philippa go off, but also like Philippa's gonna do what she's gonna do, and Archie's like, now he's torn between Philippa and wanting to go get to him, so
yeah, it's kind of it's two bad choices. And also I do love that Archie's last line is, I understand lions. Which, okay. But it was a good line. And then we get this foreboding bit, don't we, where it's like this whole discussion of Philippa's completely on her own and all of her links are broken to home, which
this is really the first time in her life too.
Yeah.
And she cries her one tear, drying her one cowardly eye, blew her nose and went off briskly.
Yeah.
Also another sentimentality reference. She shied from the boor and the prig, the sentimental and the smart, the intense and the humorless.
Yep.
And she had been cynical, as was Kate, about senseless adventure, but
they're all about exploring cultures they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like we're not gonna go off in a senseless adventure, but we're gonna slake our hunger for well-formulated culture, like our cultural hunger. So it's like we don't want to go off on an adventure, but we do want to go explore places we don't know. So I love it. Yeah. And I this briskly to her place of honor, her quest and her hopes of minimal daily nourishment without over much garlic feed of her. You just love this like uber practical. I'm gonna go honor, quest, and food that isn't too garlicked.
Yeah, she's English. Her palate is probably not very sophisticated.
I love garlic and food. She doesn't know what she's missing.
Yeah.
I know, garlic is so good.
And she's in the Mediterranean. She's going to be eating lots of garlic. Let's face it.
Yeah, I feel like she just needs to resign herself to that.
It reminds me of the scene in the previous book when the French ambassador's in the tent with the Turkish army who are attacking Tripoli, and they're like serving pilaf, and he's like, "No, we're gonna leave now. We don't want the pilaf." And I'm like, "I want the pilaf."
Like, that sounds good. Yeah, the food descriptions are, I mean, stuck in quarantine, I confess my cooking has not been all that imaginative. So.
Well, now you have some ideas from this, as well as your ideas from the Untamed. So.
Yeah. All right. Chapter 12, Jerba.
Chapter 12. Well, no, this is 11.
Oh, sorry, 11.
But chapter 12 is also called Jerba. So. I see the confusion. So this is our first of two chapters that both take place in Jerba. This chapter is very interesting because it's sort of a break from the action that's been building in this book. And we get a series of conversations, mostly between Gazelle and the prisoners. But then, like I said, that big sort of showdown happens between the three of them. But anyhow, let me look at my notes. Gazelle and Marta start off this chapter speaking together. And there's this really interesting thing that happens almost right away where Marta's like, "Oh, you're playing music. That must be to drive Lyman away because he hates it so much." And in my head, I'm like, what? Lyman doesn't hate music at all. And then I'm like, oh my God, he's still holding this, like, he's not letting music sort of get to him at this moment, which is really, really sad.
Yeah, he cannot bear it.
Yeah, he can't bear it, she says. Which makes sense, right? Because he's holding his emotions in so much. Like you said earlier, Dee, like he's trying not to feel them because he's afraid it's gonna like mess up his plans. And the music is what's gonna make his emotions come out, and so he can't bear it.
It's so sad. Ugh.
So Gazelle mentions that Jarrett is pretty much head over heels in love with Marta, and she's like, yeah, sure, whatever. And then this is actually where they talk about the Lotophagi, which are the leaders of the Lotus. I thought it was in the last chapter, but it's here. And then they sort of both sing these songs in different languages. And I really wish I had translations for them. If you have those, that would be great. Because I want to know what's being said right here.
Keep going.
Lyman tries to escape. He is unsuccessful. He gets caught. Because we find out later there's a traitor in the camp. And I'm really interested to unpack that and try and find out who it is. I think I know. She brings him back, and Gazelle says that she will kill Onofre and Ziswitz if he tries to escape again. And then there's this great sort of scene where they're in this pavilion with water rushing underneath it. And it's this very beautiful scene. And Gazelle is just giving Lyman news of the world that he's left behind on his quest, sort of what's happening in Scotland, in England, and how Margaret Lennox may be the next queen. And Lyman just keeps saying, I will deal with that after I find my child. It's like the world will go on without me until I get what I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. Which I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
Should we talk about that before I give the overview of the big...
Yeah,
let's talk about this first.
Let's unpack some stuff.
Yeah.
There's the song translations. So the one that Gazelle is singing is, it starts out, winter has cast his cloak away, his cloak of wind and cold and wet, and donned his broidered doublet of patterned sunshine, brave and gay, each bird and beast without delay, blah, blah, blah. The world is all new clad today, winter has cast his cloak away. So it's like a happier poem.
Mm-hmm.
And then the one Marta, and that's the one that, the happy song that drives Lyman away. And then the one that Marta sings, which she says, if I serenade Mr. Crawford, perhaps it will make my regard for him plainer. So this is her feelings about Lyman. This one starts out, I pray that the Lord gives you poverty, cold hearth in the winter, old age without roof, barns bare of wheat when autumn is ending, cellars empty of wine all the long summer through. And it goes on and on, wishing misery, cold fear, hot jealousy. I pray that when you are dead, another will take your beloved and marry her, is how it ends.
God, Marta.
Wow.
I'm glad that I know now. I mean, I figured it wasn't something great, but that's just on another level.
I mean, there's several moments during these conversations where Marta is, like, she says, you have happiness, why cannot I find it? Later she says, it is beautiful, is there nothing for me? Like, there's just these moments of such bitterness and anger about her fate and her life so far and what she's found. And you just get the sense that she has no desire to make anyone else's life better. Like, she's so miserable and bitter and angry, and she just is like, it's kind of like she's wishing that fate on other people. And there's some sort of, it seems like there's some sort of blame that she's placing for this state of her life on Lyman. And so she wants him to be miserable and have this horrible life and have no beauty and no happiness. And
but it's interesting because her behavior doesn't necessarily reflect that.
Yeah.
Like, she gave him that talking to that he actually really needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, she does. I still don't think that she's like, I don't think she's an evil character. And I don't think that she's wishing like genuine harm on Lyman or Jarrett, really. She's just angry and
yeah.
yeah.
Well, it could also be that there's something in particular in this scene or in this section that's making her extra bitter. And I think it's telling that, like, Gazelle is like, Jarrett's falling in love with you, you should consider him. And she keeps saying, is there nothing for me, why can't I find happiness? So, like, she wants something, but it's definitely not Jarrett. And then Kia Hatun says, what about Odysseus, meaning Lymond? And that's interesting. It's kind of like, what about your brother? Surely she must know that they're related. So it was weird, like, why don't you try incest? I don't know. Like, what is your take on this section?
Well, and her reply is, he is not a man, he is chaos, a mythical bird with a name but no body, agreeable only to the eye of the mind. The Agamarats tense have come back, which is telling. I mean, it's telling on multiple levels. Like, the idea that Lyman isn't real or isn't, is somehow mythical is interesting to me, because it makes me wonder, because it seems like she knows a lot, or she knows about Lyman in ways that he does not know about her, which makes me wonder if growing up or as part of her story, Lyman's existence has been part of her story and what things that she knows, because her existence has not been part of his story. So is he this mythical figure, this person that has been thrown up to her for whatever reason we don't know, but is he to blame in her eyes for her misery, for her lack of happiness and beauty and all that? Is that the fault of Lyman because of his existence? And does he have this sort of mythical existence to her of chaos? He is chaos. I
Well, I think they are both related and they came from similar parentage, and yet he's grown up in the gentry with privilege and she hasn't, and yet she's known her whole life that she has this brother living in privilege while she's living in potentially like very bad circumstances. You could understand why that would make him mythical to her, and also that she'd resent him.
Yeah, exactly. So and then she goes on. So mentioning the Aga Marat there is just like, oh, because we know what's happening there. And then he finds the plains here suit his cavalry trainers. Recognize him then with your mind. Why not? Two cold temperaments may consort well together. And that's Gazelle talking, right? Not Marta. Yeah. So, and then Marta says, when two hungry people lie together, a beggar is born. He will get what he will get, and so shall I. Shall I play for you? And you're just like, oh.
I mean, I think that also makes some sense. The idea of two hungry people, they're both, it's like actually very true. They're both sort of missing something in their soul that they're hungry for, right?
Right. That is not something that either of them can provide for the other. Like, they are not looking for each other.
Uh-uh.
What is your take on this whole time? There's this artist Yusuf making a water painting of a poppy, and then giving it to Marta at the end, and then at the very end she tears it up.
I mean, I think it's just indicative of like she's longing. She wants like she explicitly says she wants something beautiful, and she can't. Is beautiful. Is there nothing for me? And then she's given the beautiful thing that she was saying is beautiful, and she tears it up, like literally. And so it's just this idea that even if she's given what she wants, is she able to receive? Like, even if she was given it, can she receive it? And it seems like explicitly she can't. So like, even if like, you kind of wonder, like, even if Jarrett would be a good and beautiful thing for her, like she can't receive him. Like she's going to tear it up. And, I kind of wonder, like, maybe they would be good for each other. Like maybe he would be something that would be healing for her. Like if she didn't tear him down, if she accepted him, but she's going to tear it up.
Well, she does in that next part of the
scene. She does in the next scene. Yeah,
takes
exactly.
what he says and throws it right back in his face. So
yeah, I think you even have him explicitly thinking like, Lyman likes me and she's similar to Lyman, so maybe she'll like me for the same reasons he does. So I think you're right, there is some possibility there. She's so similar to Lyman, and clearly Jarrett is providing something meaningful to Lyman, but Marta is not able to open that part of herself to him.
Yeah. And so I think this painting is just a symbol of her inability to, I mean, you just think like this is the thing that people do. Like we long for things, but sometimes when we're given the thing we long for, we can't accept it, or we can't take it, or we don't believe it. Like we don't believe it's real, so we reject it, and I think that's part of what's happening here.
What do you think she's longing for, like truly?
I'm not sure entirely yet.
Yeah. She wants to be happy. I mean, she says she wants happiness and beauty, but what does that mean for her? Like, could it be family? Like, she's so angry about family. So
I can totally see that. Lyman getting the family that, she's a part of, but yet she wasn't able to be brought up in the same way.
Yeah.
Which
there's
a story there which I'm really interested in finding out, and like I hope we learn more about it and soon. So
yes. I really want to know what's going on with her. And does it have something to do with Lyman's grandfather? Because I feel like, because we talked about like he keeps popping up in various places and he's so memorable and people remember him, and I just feel like, is the grandfather the source of this situation? Which makes sense because we know he's connected to the Dom Digitons. We know something happened with Sibylla and France. and the grandfather. So is there some sort of situation? Does the grandfather have another family? Like,
yeah.
Who knows?
Interesting. All right, should we move on then to the next section?
Sure. So Jarrett has been convalescing here in Jerba. Oh wait, did you want to talk about Gazelle and Lyman's conversation?
That's where I was
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes. So we start out with her already knowing a lot about him from a great many sources. So that's interesting. She's been doing her research.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I do love that they've been having this give and take. And so like she's been trying to figure out Lyman and Lyman's been trying to figure out her, but they're both well aware that they're both doing it.
Yeah.
So there's this little sentence where it says she discovered that she was being sounded with great skill on a number of subjects, and it was early established without discomfort on either side that she was not amenable to bribes or any. So it's like they're sort of like testing the waters with each other, but are both well aware of what they're doing, it's just a nice way of saying like they're well matched. Like she's not getting the better of him and he's not getting the better of her in this whole give and take here. But she has more resources than he does in this particular situation. So
well, and also that they're just super worldly people. They both know what the other's doing and they're able to communicate on that level. You know?
Yeah.
We also know that she knows Gautier and Martha from an old friendship and that they're therefore safe from her. I guess presumably that's with the Dame de Dutons.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's an interesting moment as Lymond walks up to the kiosk that she's in, because we're so distant from Lyman through these chapters. It's really hard for us to know what he's thinking and feeling. Like he's almost like a side character because we get so little of what's really going on with him. But we have this moment where he hesitates stepping up to the kiosk. And then she, who's very perceptive, obviously, says, "This is not Algiers. I pray you, don't I pray you give way to nostalgia." Meaning he's hesitating because he's having this, traumatic memory of finding Una's body.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, even though he's so opaque to us right now, we can tell he's still struggling to deal with that.
Yeah. I find it also interesting that she says, if he tries to escape again, she's going to punish his servant and not a colleague. And I think that's a sign of just how well she reads him, because having someone who's dependent on him pay for his crime is worse in his mind. So, yeah.
We also have in this section the reference to Gautier as the first of all the company who had eaten the Lotus, which is an explicit Odyssey reference. For anyone who doesn't know, it's mentioned in the Dunnett Companion that it's basically people who ate of the honey sweet lotus fruit, had no desire to retrace their steps and come back with news. Their only wish was to linger there with the lotus eaters, to feed on the fruit and put aside all thought of a voyage home. So the idea of being kind of like trapped by the lure of the sweet lotus or whatever.
So do we know, obviously it's a drug reference. So do we know what drug we're talking about here? Is it opium?
Well, I was going to say it's interesting that we have this and the poppy in the same chapter.
Yeah.
Because opium comes from poppies, obviously.
Well, and it's also just a reference that Gautier is really the only one of the group that's not a prisoner right now. He has nothing to worry about here, so he's not treating it like he's in prison. So,
or I guess he is a prisoner, but he doesn't.
He is, but he doesn't. I don't think he's in any distress over that fact. He's like, yeah, I'm being kept here, but like, look, there's no big deal.
His ultimate goal, it has nothing to do with saving a child or trying to thwart anyone's plans or anything like that. So he's just doesn't care.
He's like living his dream life. He's wandering through Dragout's beautiful plunder, taking care of timepieces and correcting jewels in their settings. Like that's what he's
fixing things.
He's among beautiful things and he's getting to tinker with them.
Yeah. He's doing them a service.
So we also have in this conversation with Lymond and Kia Hatun, this moment where he talks about the Agamorat, and he's so bitter. He talks about how he got the ring that he used to escape. He says, "It came from my newly betrothed. Now let's go and ganch him, liver, lungs, tripes, and trilobubs." And then she's like, "I find rhetoric tiresome." But clearly, even though he's still sleeping with the Agamorat to keep the peace and protect Jarrett, he is so pissed and he really hates the guy.
He's angry.
Understandably so.
Yeah, as he well should be angry.
Which also, I mean, it comes back in the next section with Jarrett being the world's biggest idiot, not realizing that Lymond is doing it to protect him.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. This little exchange at the end about his son is so sad. I mean, so she says the price of Gabriel's death seems a little inflated. In other words, why are you doing all of this to kill this one guy? And he says, "And what of the boy?" said Lyman lazily, which is obviously a sign that he's more invested in it than lazily. 3 empires and a fortune in our grasp, but for him, he will never appreciate it. Gazelle said, "You do not even know if he is whole." "He does not even know that I exist," said Lymond. She rose. "That seems important?" "To me," said Lymond, "that seems equal to the sorrows of Job." So the fact that like his son has no idea that he's desperately trying to save him is just such a source of grief.
No, totally. And I think this gives us like that rare insight into what's really going on with Lymond, which is despite his attempts to the contrary, he feels so emotional in the situation. And this is why he's so scared of his emotions coming out, because he just wants to save his kid, like in the emotional way. Yeah. The logical side is like, no, you got to deal with Gabriel.
Yeah. And then we have a traitor.
Oh, right. Yes.
Well, whoever told Gazelle that Lyman was trying to escape, which is not Jarrett, because he's been convalescing. No. So it's either, I think, Marta or Gautier. And Marta would make sense. Although it also wouldn't make sense because she sort of wants to get out of this place too, although she's in no danger. So
I don't think it's Marta. I think it's either Gautier or the cook guy.
Onofrion?
Yeah. I don't see why he's not an option to be the traitor. Like,
yeah. I'm only not saying him because he's the person that she threatens to kill if Lyman tries it again. So
yeah, but
that could be covering up for the fact that he's the traitor. So
or she doesn't care and he didn't know that. Like, I think it's either him or Gautier. I don't think it's Marta, but mainly because I don't want it to be Marta. Like, I want her to be like, I want there to be a familial reconciliation between Marta and Lyman at some point. Like, I really want them to repair their relationship or have a relationship, like have a real one. And I don't want her to be betraying him. That doesn't mean she isn't the traitor. I just really don't want her to be the traitor. So
I mean, she may not have been betraying him out of malice. She may have been doing it because he was putting himself in danger. And she's like, if he's here in Jerba, at least we can keep him safe for the moment. That may have been her sort of motivations for doing it, if it was her.
Yeah, maybe.
Before we move on from this section, I think there's also a bit to talk about with the conversation they have about what's going on in the world.
Definitely.
They start with England and Scotland, Mary Tudor, and if she dies, Margaret Lennox will succeed her on the English throne. That did not happen, but it could have. Then we go to France. What's going on with France? Then we go to Russia. Hugh Willoughby sailing to the palace of Ivan Vasilovich. And we got de Villiganyan going to Brazil. Like, we go quite far through all of this. And he just keeps saying, after I kill Gabriel. What is the purpose of this conversation? Why does she bring all these things up and talk to Lyman about them? What is going on between the two of them here?
Well, the first two things are very personal. It makes me think Gazelle definitely did her research. She knows about Margaret. She knows that this is a cutting some cutting news, like, oh my God, if Margaret becomes the Queen of England, this really screws with Lymond. So she's using that information against him in this moment. And then when she moves to France, she knows that he doesn't really have feelings either way about King Henri, but the fact that, you know, St. Mary's is in France right now and that they may be in peril. Like she's trying to, like, I don't know, pick specific things, which makes me wonder then about this next section where she mentions Hugh Willoughby and Sir Thomas Wyndham. I mean, we know that he has a relationship with de Villiganyan, but we've never heard of these other people. But are they important in Lyman's life in some way that we don't know about yet?
Yeah, I mean, has Russia or the Gold Coast or Brazil been, I don't remember hearing about things that we should be concerned about in those three places, but maybe like,
well, we did hear already that de Villiganyan was going to Brazil in the beginning of this book. So that's just reiteration. But I don't know. I don't think we've even mentioned Russia in these books yet. So that's interesting that it comes up now.
It's also super interesting that Willoughby is sailing for the frozen sea by the palace of Ivan Vasilovich, Emperor of Russia, to find the courts of the great Cham of China. And I'm like, trying to go from Europe and sail to Russia and then go through Russia to China is a long trip.
Yeah.
Like, because you're gonna have, like, trying to get to China through Russia is, I mean, that's an overland hike.
Right.
So,
and by the palace of Ivan Vasilovich, I think that's the Winter Palace of the Tsars in St. Petersburg.
Yeah.
Which means it would be a trip through the Arctic Sea in order to go around the north of Russia and then get on the other side of China, which is just completely out of the way, if my geography is correct.
I mean, so it's like we're trying to find a route to China that's not the Silk Road. Like, is that what they're trying to do? You know, like an alternate trade route or something? I don't know.
Remember, a lot of geography was a mystery to them at that time. The further you go to Europe, the less they knew about what was really possible.
That's true. I mean, I used to live in a part of China that was kind of close to Russia. So, but still, you had to go through all of Russia and the Russian republics to like get to that part of China. It was a hike. So
it's kind of an interesting it's an interesting time because it's before colonialism got really exploitative, when it was still like more adventurous. Like, can we even do this? There's a very high chance that we'll die trying to find these places. So it's a little more appealing than
we've heard a rumor that this place exists and we want to go find it.
Yeah.
I think this whole conversation, though, is another way of Gazelle just letting Lyman know that Dragut and I have been keeping tabs on you. We know what you've been up to. We know what you're about. And like, this is just showing Lyman that people are paying attention.
Well, also showing him how incredibly connected she is to the rest of the world. I mean, this woman is super impressive. Like, I don't know what her deal is or what side she's on, other than Dragut's side, clearly, but she's incredibly impressive. She's well-traveled, very well-traveled, and is clearly has her like hands in pies over the entire known world. And
I think she's also like dangling these things in front of him, trying to see what gets a reaction. Trying to find if she can get a reaction other than, nope, I'm gonna kill Gabriel.
Kill Gabriel, find my son.
Yeah, which makes you wonder why. Like, why is she trying to get a reaction out of him? Why does she know about him from all these sources? What's her interest in him specifically?
Yeah. And he clearly is trying to give her no reaction, because like she says, Margaret Lennox is gonna be the next queen, and he's unblinking. Lyman spoke softly, who says so? And then it's like, Lennox rules Scotland. He may, until I kill Gabriel. So Lyman's trying to not give her anything.
Right. And then when she talks about France, she says, the fate of your company is not so far known. And he's like, I shall find them when I
shall find them.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Also, not to sort of book structure doesn't always give us clues, but it is kind of interesting that it says she says every camp has its traitor. She said yours is no exception. Goodbye. Nursed by slaves and fed by Anafrian Zwits on fish wafers and so like we do get the name of that guy as the first name that we get after the whole traitor thing. So not that doesn't really tell us anything, but it's kind of interesting.
It is.
You're very set on this theory.
I am. Well, maybe just because I don't want it to be Marta, and I don't know. And he's just like random guy. Like it's just like, why is he there? I'm very confused about why he's there, other than he's really into clothes and food. But
especially clothes.
He's super into clothes and food.
When he finds out he's gonna die, and he's like, "Well, it's better me than Lyman because he hasn't had a chance to wear all the clothes I got for him yet."
Yeah. Oh man.
So if we're moving ahead, Jared has been convalescing, and he's better enough that he gets called to the Aga Marat's tent. He witnesses what I like to call a lover's spat between the two, even though it's no such thing. They're clearly very angry at each other, and Lyman sends him away. Jared is very worried about Lyman because he sort of has been disappearing a lot lately, because I guess they're sharing a room, and like Lyman's not been in his beds for the past 2 or 3 nights. We know where he is. Jared does not figure that out. So he goes out at night and runs into Marta. During their talk, Jared confesses that he's in love with Marta. She tells him, no, you're in love with Lyman, and I'm just a facsimile, a cheap facsimile. And Lyman, of course, overhears this and shows up. There's this 3-way confrontation where among the things that happen is that Marta finally makes it clear to Jared that Lyman is sleeping with the Aga Marat. And like Jared is just dumbfounded that he didn't figure this out and doesn't know how to react to it. And then Lyman actually does sort of the same thing he did with Jolita. He lays this deep, passionate, forceful kiss on Marta. And he's like, is that close enough to incest for you? Or I'll let you be the judge of whether that was incest or not. And that, of course, just highlights of this argument. But the 3 of them the next day are just sort of, all 3 of them are sort of mad at each other. So that there's this 3-way tension bubble that's building. We get another mention of this Pierre Gilles character, and then we sort of jump to the peppercorn, which is where one of the children is with the silk merchant's sister, who was just awful, and she's like been feeding this child alcohol, and we just learn that this poor child is not doing well. So, and that's the end of this chapter.
Poor kid.
I know. Whether you be Caredon or Jobriel.
Yeah, it's like,
I'm
poor
gonna
kid.
keep calling him Jobriel until I know better.
I just want to hug this kid and be like, I just want to rescue him.
Well, and it really like hits home with what Lyman said before about it seems like, greater than the sorrows of Job, that the child doesn't know, he has someone who loves him, who's trying to save him, because we have then this poor child being horribly abused and not knowing, and it is really tragic. He has no idea that there's anyone in the world that loves him. So let's start with Jarrett entering the tent with Lymond and the Aga Morat. First off, the Aga has summoned Jarrett there. Why?
So my take on it is that Lymond is resisting the Aga Morat. Like, he doesn't want to be sleeping with them and doesn't want to be doing this, and they're having a big fight, and the Aga Morat like summons Jarrett as a threat to Lymond. It just is like, someone can take your place, and Lyman sees Jarrett, immediately sends him away, and like, I just think that's what was going on there. Like,
I think so, and also the fact that Lyman did an escape attempt. The Aga is angry at him for trying to escape, and maybe he's also threatening Jarrett out of that anger. Yeah, and
punishing him. I mean, Lyman has, it says, deep wales on his arms, so he's been punished, for this. And
oh, it's so horrible. And then of course Jared is like the least perceptive person in the world, and he's just like angry at Lyman for yelling at him to go away. And it's like Lyman is yelling at you to go away to save you from this horrible, creepy rapist guy.
Oh yeah.
What else do you have?
I mean, it's just such a defiant. It's like it's like he's screaming at this guy, just like bring it on. You know, like what else do you have? You know, just this. In the midst of all of this trauma and pain and everything, he's just still defiant and trying to keep a sense of self. And yeah,
it's very sad. So then we cut to Jarrett and Marta, and we have Marta who filled his mind tonight when an invisible key opened the door he had tried so hard to keep shut. So he's been like trying to resist this feeling for her. We can also maybe guess that he's also been trying to resist his feelings for Lymond and is like projecting them onto her because she's more acceptable, which I love that she flat out calls him on.
Yeah, I mean, his description of her is also clearly a description of Lyman when he's talking about like he's remembering his fiance. His beloved was dead. He could not remember her face. He could only remember what she was not, that her wit did not lance nor her indifference wound. I mean, that's Lyman. That her eyes were not blue nor her hair long and heavy and fair. And like, yeah.
And then he literally thinks, might he not hope that whatever had once prompted Lyman to befriend him might also please Marta.
Mm-hmm.
And then this scene I think the scene is so well written and interesting. She comes out in the night in a gown which robed her from neck to foot and smelt of myrrh. So we have all these scents in this scene. And that's actually like the reveal of the fact that Lyman's been sleeping with the Agamorad is because he smells like his scents that he wears. And if you go to Turkey, like really strong, heavily perfumed scents is very common there. Like I remember the hotel lotion was like the strongest rose smelling lotion I've ever smelled. So it's like it's accurate of the era, but also the way she uses it throughout the scene to like paint pictures in scent is just interesting.
Yeah, like the scent of, it says like African roses in the moonlight. Like it's just beautiful.
And Marta is picking apart an orange blossom flower, and so the smell of orange blossom, and then they realize, or Jarrett realizes that Lyman was outside the walls because he comes into the scene carrying the orange blossom petals that Marta had been throwing over the wall. So he was down there eavesdropping and catching the petals.
Yeah.
So she's also horrible to poor Jarrett. She says that she saw him out there, dark and beautiful and restless, walk by the fountain, and I thought to reach the nadir of tasteless and vulgar fatuity, I ought to plait my hair and walk out to you. What the hell, Marta?
Yeah. Yeah. Also, have you lost him again? He does get mislaid easily. Like she's just, you're looking for Lyman. He's not here.
And his response is, Marta, I love you.
Yeah.
So Jarrett, he's so driven by emotion.
Oh man.
This to me is sort of the opposite of the scene on the ship at night, where she was sort of trying to be the nice one when she came up with a Cupid and he was horrible to her. So it's playing out in reverse now.
Yeah, I don't think she was trying to be nice, but she was definitely like caught up in the moment and very like one of the rare times we see her as like innocent and odd, and then he, you know, ruined it.
He smashed it. Yeah. And then she like she smashes it. I mean, he's like, Marta, I love you. And she's just, I mean, I just want to see the look on her face. Like I really, really, really wish that we could, this scene, I want to see it played out in a film. Like I just want to see this done. Where she says, it seems we are sparing no cliche, you impertinent oaf of a schoolboy. It is because you can't have Francis Crawford that you want me. That is all.
And then you wonder, like, why did she dress up and come out here? Like she wants something. Like you said, she wants something, and then when she's getting it, she just smashes it and destroys it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do also like her where he's like, no, you're wrong. And she says, you didn't know? Then it's quite time someone told you, isn't it? This was what I was thinking all throughout, that is really nice.
I mean, he's speechless. Like he can't, she says this to him and he has no response for a while. Like he's just standing there in shock. And you have to figure that the shock is not, it's not horror that she has made this mistake. It's shock that something has been revealed to him about himself that he did not, or was not actually dealing with or acknowledging at all.
No, and I still don't know if he's acknowledging or dealing with it.
No. And he's got some serious internalized homophobia because he's just disgusted by this idea.
Which makes sense from like the era and the fact that he was a knight of St. John.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the way that she describes what Lyman is doing is so horrible. She says, like the camel who cannot govern his appetite and will perish in clover, still always he goes. Like implying that this is like a hunger on Lyman's part to be with this creepy guy, when actually, it's non-consensual and coerced and just being done to protect his friends.
Yeah. And I mean, she's definitely, and she's telling him like Lyman does this all the time, that this it's quite time someone's told you, like, don't apologize, I'm not easily outraged. As you know, they are very broad-minded about these matters in Islam, or if you don't know it, Francis Crawford certainly does. And it's just this, you're like, oh,
she's saying it in the worst possible way to like trigger all of his prejudices.
Yeah, right, because she's bringing up like, well, in Islam they're fine with it, which of course is going to be a huge trigger for him as a knight of St. John. Like that's going to be like, say anything to make this look bad, that's one thing to say for sure.
Yeah.
And,
so then what does Lyman say when she starts threatening to, what he mean when he says this? She starts threatening to reveal where he's been, and he says, if we are to have enlightenment, I propose that we have general enlightenment. Will you call Kiaya Hatun, or should I?
I mean, do you think like he knows that she has a prior connection to her, and that's what he's saying? Like there's threads going on here that Jarrett doesn't know, and if you're gonna start telling my threads, then I'm gonna start telling yours, or like
what could be so bad that it would be equivalent of what she's threatening to reveal about him?
I took it to be that he's calling her the traitor, that he's calling her out and being like, I know that you told Kiaya Hatun that I tried to escape the other day. That was my take on this.
But then, yeah, maybe. Yeah.
She also, so she says, do what you wish, I don't care. And he says, but I do. I know you are bitter. I won't believe you are jealous. And then, she says, I don't want Jarrett Blythe. And he says, be quiet. I know that. I spoke of something quite different. Mm-hmm. What is that?
Yeah, what is the thing that she's jealous of that isn't Jarrett? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know enough about things to make any sort of real decision yet.
Yeah, because I don't think she's jealous of Lyman, and I don't think that's what he's saying there. I don't know.
Jealous of Lyman in what way?
Or she's not jealous of Lyman romantically, like obviously, but is she jealous of his family situation? Maybe. I don't know. But he says, I won't believe you're jealous. I know you're bitter. I won't believe you're jealous. So he's saying she's not jealous of something.
Well, and I mean, so there's an implication. He says, I won't believe you're jealous. And she says, I don't want Jarrett Blythe, meaning like she thinks he's saying she might be jealous of him because Jarrett likes him. And then he says, no, that's not what I meant. He meant something different.
Yeah.
So is there someone else who's into Lyman that she's jealous?
I don't know. Either I feel like I'm either missing it or we just don't know yet. Like we just don't know enough about her backstory. And I don't feel like we really know what she wants. Like we don't know what her motivations are for honestly any of this. Like why is she on this trip? Like I don't think we know. And so that's a huge question. I feel like that is a key question that we need to answer before we can figure out what's going on with her. It's just, why is she here? And obviously there's, she's doing business for Gautier and she's his assistant and blah, blah, blah. But I don't think that's the reason she's on the trip. So I don't know.
This will be one of those conversations that we can come back to later on in the book and parse out and realize what actually was going on.
Right. I feel like Marta's motivation is kind of like Lyman's promise in the last book. It's like, what did he promise and why did he promise it? And we kind of kept talking about that. And I kind of feel like what's going on with her is similar. Yeah.
So I love his line when he says, you are a night hunting sable, my Marta, and your fur is soft and your teeth are sharpened and wounding, but so are mine, so are mine. And then he says, we are in the mud, let us wallow. And that's where he gives her this horrible kiss, the longest and most savage kiss of which he was capable. And we know he's just come from the Agamorat. We know he smells like the Agamorat. So he's been using his mouth with that guy. So when he kisses her, she probably tastes like the Agamorat, which is part of why I'm so completely grossed out by this scene. Not to mention the incest part and the non-consensual kiss.
Yeah.
Which is not the first time we've seen Lyman use this exact same move.
With Jolita, you mean?
Mm-hmm. Although Jolita wasn't his sister.
And also, I feel like he's been drugged as well, because we get this, Francis Crawford was none too steady in his heavy-lidded eyes. There was a queer lack of focus, a masking almost like blindness, which feels like he's been drugged somewhere. So
there's definitely something going on there.
Something's going on.
Whether it's a drug or it's his own messed up emotional state.
Yeah.
There's definitely something going on there.
Yeah. So, and then he just gets this, like, there's this comment about incest is just like, and whether that approached incest or not, I suppose only that was a dig at her for like, you haven't told me, like, this is on you because you haven't told me, like, what our relationship is and you haven't told me what it is. So, like there was definitely, I feel like, some bitterness in that line about she's not giving him information and he wants it. And
for sure, yeah. And I think, it also tells us this has been on his mind, right? He can't stop thinking about like, how are we related? What happened here? Like, I want to know.
Yeah, for sure.
And he's like afraid to know. It's part of why he tried to send her away, right? She called him out on that before.
Yep. Oh.
And then we cut to the next day and Jarrett, who's thinking something completely different than what's really happening. And it's very homophobic. And he's feeling sick, thinking about how the best company of men he'd ever known was Francis Crawford's. And he's just like ready to go home. And he's thinking about that moment where Lyman said, however much I try, don't let me turn you against me. But he's thinking the man who had spoken those words had not been the same person, or perhaps it was he himself who had changed. So like, I think he's very sincerely like planning to leave at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too. Oh, and then we get this really sad little section about the little kid who's having a miserable, miserable time.
Yeah, this child is very young. And so these experiences at this age are, not setting him up for a very healthy development, right?
Yeah. The amount of damage this is doing to him permanently is just heartbreaking.
And that he's being drugged on alcohol, and he could hold his drink like a man, which, yeah. I mean, it could be a hint about Lyman being his father because Lyman can also hold his drink, but I think it's more like he's just, a little child who's being forced to drink a lot of liquor, and that's what happens.
Yep.
I think we also can assume safely this is the same child that Jarrett saw, right? Because it's
I think so.
The silk farmer's sister.
Yeah.
I mean, Dunnett specifically calls this child Caredon in this chapter, but that could just be the unreliable narrator speaking again. So,
yeah, we don't know.
Don't know for sure if this is Caredon or Jobriel.
You were cracking me up with that. Unnamed blonde baby.
Yes.
Okay.
We just call him Joe for short. Chapter 12.
Let's not dwell on the poor kid on the ship.
Jerba. So this is definitely the most action-packed chapter of this little sequence. The prisoners are sort of let out of the compound to go watch the Aga Marat's horsemen do this sort of exhibition. This almost like, it's like a rodeo / archery range / they're just showing off what they can do. Yeah. So while this happens, there's this wine merchant that Jarrett desperately wants to get some wine. And one thing that's interesting is most of this chapter is told from Gazelle's point of view, which I thought was really interesting. So she sees them having this argument. Jarrett really wants the wine. Lyman is trying to get him to not drink the wine, but they sort of have this spat where he pushes him away. And then Jarrett starts drinking this wine and just gets really, really drunk. Or at least that's what Gazelle thinks is happening. What's really happening is that they are working on an escape plan. And they both are seen drinking this wine, but it turns out that it's just water. So neither of them is actually drunk. Jarrett finds out through Lyman that Archie Abernathy is now back, and he has warned Lyman about what's happening in Zwara, that the Knights of St. John are going to attack, and they're going to have Gabriel with them. So we may finally get Gabriel's first appearance in this book. And that the plan is for them to be soundly defeated at Zwara, because that way Gabriel can sort of change his focus onto gaining influence in the Ottoman Empire, because I think he knows that there's no way he's going to become the Grand Hospitaller through Juan de Homedes. So he's sort of moving his power sphere elsewhere. So Jarrett really plays up this drunkenness. He starts throwing cushions down, and then he jumps into the arena and mounts a horse. Lyman also comes into the arena, and they work out this plan where they can both escape on horseback through the back of the Aga Marat's tent. They do pull it off, and they end up taking Gazelle with them when they do. She tries to stab him through the heart with a dagger, or at least she holds him hostage sort of that way and keeps telling him, you need to come back, you need to come back. But Lymond makes her aware that he knows about the planet Zwara, in which case I think she changes her mind then, and she stabs the horse that they're on. And Jarrett and Lyman escape to where Archie is waiting for them, and they are going to go to Zwara to see if they can head off whatever is happening there. A lot to unpack.
I like the big action sequence. I think we needed something to let off some of the tension and stress of the previous chapter. And it's a nice way to balance out like Jarrett's like this disgust and homophobia, but then he like actually has this adventure with Lyman where he's like reminded of how well they get on and work together.
And it was just fun to see them both like be super competent in their like athletic prowess and all that. Like that was just fun to see, because we haven't seen, like, there's been a lot of bad stuff's been happening
And our heroes have basically been like victims of fate throughout this whole book, so they finally like accomplish something in escaping here.
Yeah.
They good with horses.
Yeah.
And it's also sort of a throwback to when they were kids, because like Jarrett mentioned, like they mentioned like practicing as children and young men, like with horses and all of that.
Yeah, reminder of like what brought them together way back. So we actually start out with the Agamorat and Kiaya Hatun arguing with each other. And I think she's sort of ripping on him for causing them to be driven into such a position that they would be ready at any cost to attempt an escape, meaning like, you know, you messing around with Lymond is making him like desperate to escape, which is not what Dragut wants, right?
And she also, like, she made this one comment that I was like, ew, I don't like her now, where she says, if I cannot keep them under lock and key, I will keep them with drink and with drugs. Once they are comatose, you're welcome to visit whichever you choose. And you're just like, oh, okay, I don't like you anymore, lady. Like, I was kind of on the fence about her for a while, but that comment just, ugh.
I mean, I think we have to keep in mind that she's like risen to a great power in a very corrupt world, and you don't do that by keeping your hands entirely clean.
Yeah. And then you just got this like description of the Agamorat, which was but a good description, where it says, and the Agamorat longing in his eyes and rage in his heart, and you're just like, oh
yeah. So then I also think it's interesting that the scene between Lyman and Jarrett starts for real. Like Jarrett really is angry at him and really is wanting to drink, and really like does want to hit him. And even when he realizes that, you know, Lyman is whispering to him and that it's a scene and it's an escape attempt, he still hits him as hard as he can.
And takes much joy in it.
Yeah.
But I do love that they're finding out exactly what Philippa already found out, right? And the plan to get Archie there and pass on the information. That's pretty good, right? If Philippa hadn't gone in her pathway, they never would have found this out.
True.
Yeah, and I like that Archie just seems super capable. Like he got there, he got them the message, he made, you know, he was in disguise, it worked, you know.
Yeah, he's got some questionable judgment, but he's very
yeah.
There's also a really interesting exchange where Lymond is, I think he's pretending to be drunk at this point. He's sitting there with Kiaya Hatun and Agamorat, letting the Agamorat like put his hand on his shoulder, and she's talking to him about drinking, and he makes this comment: liberty to drink and to debauch are said to recreate and refresh the soul. And then, you know, she says then, and he says, I have no soul, forgive me. And I think his line, I have no soul, is really interesting in terms of like, they're obviously having a somewhat facetious conversation, but at the same time, I think he's sort of expressing something he does feel about himself.
Yeah, I think he makes these offhand comments that just reveal his lack of value, like lack of understanding that he has value as a, you know, that Lyman has value because he exists, you know, like I don't think he believes that at all. I think he believes that his soul value comes from the things that he can do for people, and instead of the fact that he has value because he's a person. And you know,
well, and he also believes that he's like corrupted and bad and to like do damage to be a good person. Like he's believed that going back to Game of Kings.
So
I would assume he gets that from everything that's happened to him, but a lot comes from his father. So
I think his father and Margaret Lennox, like between the two of them messing with him at a young age, like no wonder he has really like messed up self-perception.
Yeah, he had a foundation of poor self-esteem and then massive amounts of trauma piled on top of that, which Lyman.
I think it's also telling that when Lyman jumps into the arena, the Agamorat says, he's drunk, he'll kill himself, said the Agamorat, grumbling. And then Kiaya Hatun says, let him go. Because I think Agamorat is like very actually possessive of Lyman, right? He doesn't want him to die. He wants him to be his.
Yep. I agree.
And we have Marta, I love Marta, having figured out what's going on and that the liquor was water. The first cup was real liquor that sort of would smell like it, and they'd get it all over themselves and smell like liquor, but then everything after that was water. And she's just like, she's so smart, she knows exactly what's going on. And Gautier is like, has no idea. She has to explain to him.
Yeah. Again, neither of them are in danger, so they're not in any danger of being retribution hitting them if Lyman escapes. So
one thing I think is sort of interesting, going back to what you were saying, Laura, about just like them being sort of at the hand of fate up to this point, it kind of also goes back to that like subject object dichotomy, where it's like Lyman is objectified so drastically by the Agamorat and by that, like he is an object to possess, and yet in this scene he becomes subject, you know, and is becomes the doer instead of the one done upon. And
well, and I think that goes back to the title of the book, Pawn and Frankincense, because the pawn is the object, and your assumption is the pawn is the child, which I think is true, but I think Lyman is also the pawn frequently throughout this book, and in particular Gabriel's pawn, as Gabriel's manipulating all these things that happen to him.
Yeah. Wait, so we have this big action scene. I don't know. I don't have anything to say really other than it was cool.
Cool, and it's another thing that really, you know, if you're doing your tourism thing, you can see men. I think you can still see kind of like the horse racing tricks, but certainly back then was a real thing.
So it was one of the more difficult action sequences for me to follow, just because of all this sort of like acrobatics and this visual gymnastics going on horseback. And like, I just can't fathom that you could jump from number one, that you can stand on top of a horse while riding it and jump to the back of another horse while it's also moving. That seems...
Well, I've seen it before.
I'm like, sure it happens
all the time,
but like it just seems so...
Yeah, you should Google it. You should Google video. There's a lot of like, there's YouTube video of people doing this, and so it looks amazing. I don't know how they do it, but yeah.
I think what's unrealistic is that Jarrett and Lyman would just be able to do it. Like, you know, like, okay, the horses are trained, the horses are behaving, they know what's going on, and like Lyman and Jarrett have observed what the men are doing, but still just being able to jump in and do it is kind of like, you know, Lyman's a bit of a superhero in terms of the unrealistic nature of what he manages to pull off.
Yeah, I agree completely. Like, I think this is something that you have to practice over and over and over, and you have to be like in sync with your people and your horses and like to do all of that. Yeah.
Maybe Lyman brought a special guest lecturer to St. Mary's to teach them horseback tricks.
Yeah.
Maybe. Maybe. Yeah, I also think it's interesting that it's not just that Gabriel is planning to, you know, betray the knights and go over to the Turkish side, but also that the Turks want to expose him so that he'll have to come over to their side and be useful to them. Is basically what Lyman is thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I also think his exchange with Kiaya Hatun is interesting because she's tough as nails. She's like, I'm gonna kill you and let me go. And he won't, and he says, sooner or later we die. If it happens to me here and now, nothing will alter. So like he really doesn't care if she kills him, aside from the fact that he does want to save the kid.
And I think that goes back to their conversation about the world, where it's kind of like, you know, it'll keep turning, like things will happen. I'll deal with it after I kill Gabriel. If I die in the meantime, the world will keep turning. And
yeah. Also interesting that he observes, you know, based on this conversation with her, he observes, you do not like Gabriel. Do you think he's right? What do you think makes him think that?
Where are you?
Give me 231 at the top.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. I wonder, like, Gazelle is, it seems like the defining characteristic of her life is loyalty to Dragut. Like, that seems to be her, like, she will do, now perhaps that's self-interest, and like the best thing for her life is that she's loyal to Dragut, but Gabriel is loyal to no one. You know, like there is nothing in his life, higher power, other person, country, like nothing. And I wonder if that is part of it a little bit, that he has no loyalties at all.
Certainly not to his sister.
Oh my God, no.
Yeah, nothing.
Is that too soon?
It's not too soon. Yeah, loyalty to nothing except his own self-interest.
Yeah.
It's also just quite telling that she's tough as nails and she's really smart. When she realizes threatening Lyman's life isn't going to work, that's when she kills the horse. But she's not unreasonable. Like she basically, agrees to send the Dauphiné free in exchange for them letting her go. So also her interest is herself.
Yeah, and she's kind of achieved her goal. So like, she did delay them as long as she needed to, and so now it's like, okay, well now you're like, I don't need you to stay, so you can go. Like, it doesn't hurt her to give in to what they want, so she just lets them, and that's cool.
Yeah, and a lot of what was happening here with the horses was just a distraction, because the real thing's going to be happening at Zwara, where, if I may be saying that wrong, in fact I probably am, but that's where Gabriel is headed. So,
and it's already started.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not.
And at least this way, Salablanca and Onofrion are now safe as well.
True, right? Yeah.
Because they'll be released along with the Dauphiné.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So then I love the reunion with Archie, where Lyman is like, tell me about Philippe. And I'm like, I'll tell you later.
Not
and
now.
then he freaks out, which is so great. Like, how often does Lyman say anything in italics? Like, I love it. He like shouts with italics and exclamation point.
You left her alone.
Yeah.
And also, just the way he summarizes it is so great. You tell me now that you have left her among total strangers in a country quite unknown to her and about to attempt a journey by herself into the wilds of Macedonia in order to buy, my God, I think you must be insane, said Francis Crawford. And for a second, his voice split, lacerated by nerves. Again, we don't usually get this from him. And then the child of 12 let loose. She has no idea how old she is. But no, I mean, and it makes sense that he's so upset, right? Because this is Kate's child that he feels responsible for.
Yeah.
And he's like, the whole thing is a trap. It must be.
Yeah, and Archie's trying to convince him, like, no, I think this is the real kid.
It sounded right.
Well, now they know that there's two.
Yeah.
They're on the trail of two different children.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, Jarrett thinks the one they have is the real one. Archie thinks the one on the island is the real one. And yeah.
Well, I also think that is super telling. The first one that you make an emotional connection with is the one you think is the real one, right? Like, Jarrett is so funny. He's so emotional about it. He's like, I know, I've held him in my arms, Francis.
Yeah. Like, it couldn't just be another kid. Like, it has to be the kid we're looking for. Yeah. And then Francis just like, there can't be two boys so alike, and then he figures it out.
Yeah, he knows right then and there, right? This is when he figures out, oh, it's Gabriel's child.
Yeah.
That's what I thought too. It's also interesting that he flat out says that he believes the Dame de Dutance, although he says whether I can interpret her correctly or not is another matter entirely.
Mhm.
But she's also a fraying post for bloody neurotics. So that's what he says about her just a few paragraphs earlier.
Yeah.
Who knows? Well, speaking of neurotic, Lyman is at the top of that list, to be honest.
And then poor Jarrett, he's like, well, if we kill Gabriel, then we'll know which one is the real kid because it'll be the one who dies. It's just like, watch and see which child will die.
So do you think Lyman is really going to kill Gabriel and let the child die?
I don't think so.
He super wants to, but I think now especially that he doesn't know which child is which.
Yeah.
Maybe before, when he had an idea, they were actually after the real Karedin. But I think this changes his plans, learning that there's two.
I think his heart is going to win out. I think if he tries to come out of this dispassionate, logical, it's better to kill Gabriel, like sense, like that's the side that he's desperately trying to be the side that he lives. But I do not think that's going to win. Like, I think when the choice comes down to, I take this action and this boy has a possibility of living, or I take this action and this boy has a definitely is going to die, I don't think he's going to choose the boy will die action. If he does choose that action, I think it's going to be, I don't even want to imagine what it's going to do to his already completely broken self-image. Like, if he has to live with having made that choice.
So speaking of what's going to happen, what do you guys think or hope is going to happen next?
I think this Zwara scene is going to be interesting. I think we'll have our grand entrance of Gabriel in this book finally, because it's about time. Now that we're almost halfway through, he's got to show up eventually.
Oh, yeah. We are almost halfway through.
Yeah. And it seems to be where the plot is moving to at the moment, because both separate plot lines now are pointing to this moment. So,
yeah. I think we're all going to end up together. Like, I'm interested to see how we hook back up with Philippa. So are we all going to go to Constantinople? I think to Istanbul. Yeah. I don't know. We gotta see Dragut too. Like, we gotta get like surely he's gonna show up. Surely. And maybe the Sultan? Like, that would be cool. I don't know.
What do you think is going to happen with Kiaya Hatun? Have we left her behind, or is she going to do more stuff?
She'll be back.
I think she'll be back.
What is her role in this book? What is it going to be?
I almost wonder if she's sort of pulling the strings of the whole thing, that she's the one that set things in motion when she was at the Dame de Dutance's house, and that she's really trying to get the child back to Lymond without Dragut knowing. But I don't know for sure.
Oh. That seems drastic.
It does.
Maybe.
But we know she doesn't like Gabriel. So maybe she's just trying to foil Gabriel's plans, or she's trying to do her part to help. I want to see her as a beneficial character who is on the same side. This last chapter, I don't know if it fits that theory, but like, I like her, so I want her to be doing good for the characters that we love. That doesn't mean that's what's happening.
Like, if you think about like the D&D grid of character motivation, I sort of see her as like lawful neutral.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she's not good, she's not bad, but she does follow she follows the rules, or she lives within a system of rules and is able to manipulate those rules.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I would say neutral, because she also was like, once they're drunk, you can have either one of them.
Yeah.
That wasn't great.
Yeah,
there's definitely a reason she was at the Dame de Dutance's in the beginning of the book. I feel like she helped set this whole thing up.
For sure. I mean, but I'm not completely convinced that the Dame de Dutance's that good and or noble of a character either.
It's true.
So she seems kind of chaotic neutral. So yes, I don't know.
And how about Philippa? What's going to happen with Philippa? Is she going to find the right kid?
She's gonna find one of the kids.
I think she's gonna find a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still, if everything is peachy keen on her end and she finds the child and Mikhail is really helpful and he's not evil or menacing or a traitor in any way,
Or
I would
Stevie.
be very surprised. I don't foresee things going well for her, but she'll definitely reunite with Lymond at some point.
Yeah.
So
I'm a little bit nervous that this whole identity of children thing will never get resolved. Like, I'm a little bit nervous that they just won't know. And it'll just be like, we got 2 kids. And I mean, you know, like maybe he'll just adopt 2 kids and we'll have like 2 boys that go back to Scotland, and
Kevin will have 2 cousins.
yeah, I don't know.
It's not like you could do a DNA test back then.
Right, exactly. Like if the people who know the identity of these kids die or are otherwise lost, like,
I mean, I would assume at a certain age, one of the kids would start looking a little bit more like Lymond than the other.
yeah, you would think so.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows?
That's assuming that everything's peachy keen and he rescues both children and brings them back home. There's still 2.5 books to go in this whole series, so
please, 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 can we not end this book with dead children? Like, I really, really, really do not want to have dead toddlers at the end of this book. I will be so sad. Like, lots of bad things can happen. I'll stick with it, but oh, I really don't want.
I mean, that would put Lyman in a really horrible place for the next 2 books.
Yeah, yeah. Horrible. Horrible, horrible.
Mm.
Yeah, okay.
What do you think is going to happen with Jared and Marta?
Oh, that is not going to end well. I mean, unless Marta gets some serious therapy and Jared, I don't know. I just feel like whatever her, and I don't say this flippantly, but like whatever her damage is, and I don't mean that in like a mean girl sense, it's really like she's just sabotaging herself in every way. And I just don't see that getting better without, I don't know. And I don't think Jarrett is the person who can deal with it very well. Like, he does not seem to be the person who can help her process. So, and he clearly needs to be doing some processing himself, which I don't think he's set up well to do. So,
if only we could just like put these people in therapy.
We just dump everyone into therapy. Yeah.
Philip is like the only person with common sense, and she just went off by herself.
Everybody needs to go spend a retreat of multiple months at Kate's house. just go to Kate's house and let her like fix you. Talk through all your issues and eat some good food.
Maybe that's what book 5 is. The Ringed Castle is literally just Kate's castle at Claw Valleys, and everybody
just go to Kate's house.
For a whole book of them just sitting peacefully and talking about their issues.
Yep. Sitting around a fire, playing some music, eating blackberry pie. Yeah.
Therapeutic pie.
Therapeutic pie. Exactly.
Any other thoughts you guys want to share about this book so far and what you're expecting?
I have no idea what's going to happen. Like, yeah, I'm excited to read the next bit.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.